Thank you, Mike, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you, particularly on Hamilton Island. What a wonderful venue for a conference. When Ken Morrison asked me to speak to you this morning, he asked if I would address two issues. The first is to give you a bit of a perspective on current economic conditions, and the second is to take a longer view. In Ken's word, tell us what we need to do to be successful. So I want to do both of those things in the next 20 minutes or so, and then as you can see, Ken's going to engage me in some Q&A after my remarks and hopefully unpack both of those issues for you, as important as they are. In particular, when we come to the second one about what it is we need to do to be prosperous or successful, I want to really point the focus back on yourselves, back on this industry, which has a very, very particular and important role to play in answering that question. Now, I'll show you a few slides. These slides have been prepared by my colleagues at Deloitte Access Economics, whom I acknowledge. I was a partner at Deloitte for 10 years, and one of the things that I've got as a retired partner is access to the slide-making machine. So young colleagues, former economist colleagues of mine, helped me to put these slides together, and I'm very grateful to acknowledge them. It's also important to acknowledge that when we talk about forecasts, they will be Deloitte Access Economics forecasts. I mean, I agree with them, but they're not forecasts that have any official status. I have the privilege of serving on the Reserve Bank of Australia board. I'm one of 9 people who are members of the Reserve Bank of Australia board. And so it's important for me to say, ladies and gentlemen, that all of my remarks this morning are my own. The forecasts that I'll be presenting are Deloitte Access Economics forecasts, which I happen to agree with. We put them together, but they're not official forecasts. And when you hear from me, you're hearing from one person who happens to be on the Reserve Bank board. I have one vote. So even if I were to say to you, which I'm not going to say to you, the Reserve Bank will do X, you would be rightly skeptical, because you'd say, well, that's one voice out of 9. And why should we believe that? So I think it's important for us to remember both of those things. Well, let's kick off. It won't surprise you to learn, as this chart shows, that we've got global tensions essentially bearing down on the world's major economies. The most important tension is the so-called trade and technology war that's being waged between China and the United States, initiated essentially by the United States. Now, the immediate impact of that, of course, is to continue to raise tariffs, and both sides are simply saying we're going to make it more expensive for people to do business with our respective countries, and we're going to, in some cases, simply stop importing. The Chinese have started to stop importing US soybeans. Much more is going on behind that than meets the eye. So economically, it's a tit for tat. But the United States is really trying to make a point to the Chinese about hegemony, about overarching authority in the area of technology. I'm not going there today. I just want to make the point to you that while you watch the surface play out here, I'm not saying that it's not damaging, it clearly is, as a sort of Punch and Judy show between China and the US, it isn't just about tariffs. And when people point out that raising tariffs against the Chinese actually hurts the Americans, that's true. The Americans know that. So why are they doing this? Because there are bigger fish to fry here. There are bigger issues at play that have to do with the future of technology and platforms, data, and all of that. I won't go into it. But the impact that you can see here is already evident. So the Chinese economy is slowing. You read these charts this way. These are GDP growth charts, so they're showing the growth of the economy. The light green here is the average over 10 years to 2017, and the dark green is 2018, and the light blue there is the 2019 forecast from Deloitte Access Economics. Well, you can see the Chinese economy slowing. You can see the United States economy slowing, the 2 largest economies in the world. You can see the impact on the Eurozone. The German economy has already had 1 quarter of negative growth. Now, admittedly, in Europe, you've got Brexit as well, but the bigger impact, particularly through motor vehicle sales and other engineering and manufacturing sales that it's having on Germany and therefore on the European economy, has a lot to do with the slowdown of the Chinese economy. As does slowdown, not shown in this chart, elsewhere in Asia, where the technology sector is taking a hit because of what's going on in China. You can see on the same chart here, of course, that we've been slowing, as have our friends across the Tasman. The Japanese, interestingly, have been sort of flat. They've been doing quite well relative to recent times. Some of what's happening in China has reflected favourably on the Japanese economy. There are also some other domestic factors in Japan that have brought their economy forward. And the UK, you can see, has benefited, despite Brexit, from a weaker pound. But the big economies in the world are slowing, and they're slowing principally because what happens when you have a trade dispute of this type, between the United States and China in particular, is that there's slowing in manufacturing growth and slowing, of course, in investment as trade slows. This chart here shows you that the growth in world exports is now negative, so they're shrinking. And that's having an impact on the growth of manufacturing, particularly, as I said, affecting Germany and other parts of Asia. And most importantly, it affects business certainty. So no one really knows where this might end up. And the fear factor, as is often the case with economics, can be far more potent than some of these direct effects. The most direct impact of the fear is on business uncertainty and its impact on investment. So investment growth, business investment, is slow here in Australia, it's slow in the United States. The consumer, fortunately, is doing quite well in the US, which is keeping the US economy running along quite nicely, but not business investment, and not here either. I don't need to tell an audience like yourselves that when the outlook is uncertain, in spite of the fact that the cost of funds, the cost of investing, is at historic lows. If businesses are uncertain, then they sit on their hands. That's what's happening, and that's what's driving the slowdown in growth in these major economies. Here in Australia, of course, we can't escape. These are the latest numbers. These are quarterly numbers from the most recent GDP figures. And you'll see what's happening here. Well, first up, here's the impact on domestic investment. So again, this light green bar represents the average over the last 4 quarters, the last year. And the dark green bars are the most recent quarter for which we have the data, the June quarter of this year, 2019. This bar here represents private investment. You can see that it's shrinking. And you can see that's also being exacerbated by the decline in inventories. So businesses across the Australian economy aren't even producing enough to allow their inventories to grow. So they're running their inventories down and actually reducing private sector investment. Household consumption is weak. Hasn't shown much change over the last 12 months or so, but it's weak. So the domestic consumer, essentially because wages growth is weak, I'll come back to that in a minute. So consumption, which is roughly 60% of the economy, is not, unlike the United States, keeping us shunting along. Investments going backwards. Are there any bright factors here? Well, the trade accounts are doing quite well. It's an ill wind which blows nobody any good. As the Chinese suffer under the impact of the trade war with the United States, they stimulate the Chinese economy. So they've eased their monetary policy and they've increased government spending. What that typically does in China, of course, is to produce more activity in the manufacturing industry. They need more steel. They need more iron ore. And our exports of iron ore and the international prices that have affected iron ore are also stimulated, supported by that activity in China. So our terms of trade, particularly as a result of the prices of things like iron ore, have been sustained over this period, which has kept the Australian dollar higher than you might have otherwise expected it to be. So our trade accounts have been buoyed by this. There's a strong trade surplus. In fact, in recent times, the whole current account of the balance of payments has gone back into surplus for the first time since 1975. Here you need to be a little bit careful. For a lot of people who aren't sort of tutored in this, they think the word surplus means good and deficit means bad. And you can't be blamed if you listen to reports on the television or you read the newspaper articles about this. Normally, Australia runs a current account deficit. What that means is that domestically investment exceeds the amount of domestic saving that we do, so we borrow or we take invested funds from offshore. We're a capital importer. That's how we grow our economy. We're relatively small in the scheme of things, and the projects that we invest in are much larger. And so we have national investment exceeding national saving, and in the mystery of the national accounts, that produces a current account deficit. So you should begin to see where this is travelling. If now we have a current account surplus, what that means is that we've ceased to be a capital importer. We are now a capital exporter. That is to say, investment in this country is so weak relative to national saving that we're now shunting savings on balance offshore. Now, at some level, that's neither good nor bad. Of course, we invest offshore. We earn the income from that, which is part of the reason the current account is in surplus. I make the point to you that it's not something to be celebrated, as if somehow or other this is the best we could wish for, is the current account surplus. No, no, no. What it's telling you is simply affirming this information here, The domestic investment is so weak, including investment from offshore entities in this country, that what we save, particularly as a result of our compulsory savings regime through superannuation, now exceeds that, as a result of which we're shunting funds offshore. It's just telling you what this chart and other charts are telling you, that investment is weak